In the early days of 2025, something unusual happened in East Africa that caught the attention of many people across the continent. It started as a regular diplomatic visit, but it soon became a topic of conversation in homes, cafes, and online discussions in nearly every African country. The name that people began to hear everywhere was General Michael Langley. General Langley was not just any ordinary visitor. He was a respected and high-ranking officer in the United States military. More importantly, he was the first black four-star general in the long history of the U.S. Marine Corps. His position as the head of U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, made him one of the most powerful people responsible for America's military interests in Africa. When news broke that General Langley was coming to Kenya, many people became curious. His visit was not hidden or secret. In fact, it was openly announced by both the Kenyan and American governments. They shared the official reason for his trip, to discuss security cooperation, military partnerships, and ways to fight against terrorism together. On the surface, it all seemed like a normal official trip. But in Africa, things are rarely as simple as they appear. As General Langley's plane landed at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, cameras flashed and local television stations quickly broadcast his arrival. Kenyan officials greeted him warmly. There were flags, security guards, and a formal welcoming ceremony. Reporters from different news agencies reported live updates, describing his arrival as an important step in strengthening Kenya-US relations. However, the public reaction across Africa was mixed. While some people saw the visit as a positive sign of partnership and mutual respect, others viewed it differently. Social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok were quickly filled with comments and opinions. Young people, in particular, were eager to share their thoughts. Some praised the visit, saying it showed that Africa was finally being noticed and respected on the global stage. They believed it could bring new opportunities, training programs, and investments. On the other side, many people questioned the true purpose of the visit. They wondered why AFRICOM, a U.S. military organization, was so interested in Africa's affairs. In countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, where recent years had seen political changes and strong anti-foreign movements, the visit raised eyebrows. People remembered past times when foreign military forces operated in Africa under the promise of peace and security but left behind complicated situations. In Kenya itself, the mood was also mixed. Government officials welcomed Langley warmly, but some civil society groups and ordinary citizens expressed concerns. Was this visit really about security, or was there something more? Many asked whether Kenya and other African nations were slowly becoming too dependent on foreign military powers to solve problems that should be addressed locally. Meanwhile, Kenyan newspapers gave wide coverage to the visit. Headlines like U.S. Top General Meets Kenyan Leaders and Strengthening Kenya-U.S. Security Ties appeared in the morning papers. Television talk shows invited political analysts to discuss the meaning of Langley's presence in East Africa. Some experts said it was a smart move by the U.S. to improve ties with African nations at a time when global competition for influence on the continent was growing. China, Russia, Turkey, and other nations were also increasing their presence in Africa, so the U.S. did not want to be left behind. Others, however, were more cautious. They spoke about Africa's long history with foreign powers and how many times behind the promises of partnership and friendship, there were deeper interests. These interests were often connected to Africa's valuable natural resources like oil, minerals, and land, or its important geographical position. As Langley's meetings began, he held talks with Kenya's top defense officials. Discussions were said to focus on cooperation against terrorism, especially in the fight against Al-Shabaab, a militant group operating in neighboring Somalia. Kenya has been a key partner in peacekeeping missions and security operations in the region, and the U.S. has provided training, funding, and equipment to Kenyan forces for many years. But outside the official meeting rooms, the African public continued to follow the visit closely. On social media, hashtags related to Langley's visit began trending. Videos of his arrival and short clips of his speeches were shared thousands of times. In West African countries, the reactions were even stronger. Many young Africans in Burkina Faso and Mali, who had recently shown support for new military leaders who promised to protect Africa's independence, expressed doubt about the U.S. general's visit. Some internet users pointed out that while African countries were capable of handling their own security issues, powerful foreign nations often came with offers of assistance that later turned into long-term military presence. They feared that these visits might lead to foreign armies staying on African soil for too long, making decisions that should belong to African governments and people. As the first day of Langley's visit came to an end, Kenyan television stations continued to report on the events. Government spokespeople emphasized the importance of the partnership and the benefits it could bring to Kenya. They spoke about improved training for Kenyan soldiers, better equipment, and increased cooperation in fighting terrorism. Some even mentioned possible economic projects that could come as a result of the strong relationship between the two nations. In the evening, cafes and homes in Nairobi were filled with conversations about the visit. In West Africa, from Ouagadougou to Bamako, similar conversations took place in markets, homes, and public gathering spots. Africa was watching, listening, and discussing. What seemed like a simple official visit had turned into a continent-wide topic, raising important questions about Africa's future, its partnerships, and the path it wanted to take in a fast-changing world. The visit of General Langley to Kenya was more than just a routine trip. It became a symbol of the larger discussion about Africa's place in the world, the kind of relationships it should build, and whether its leaders would stand firm in protecting the continent's independence and dignity. The story had just begun, and people across Africa were paying close attention. As the sun rose over Nairobi the next day, news about General Michael Langley's visit was everywhere. Radio spoke about it early in the morning, newspapers had bold headlines, and television news showed short clips of his meetings from the day before. People walking to work, sitting in matatus or drinking tea in small cafes could be heard talking about the American general who had come to visit their country. It wasn't just Nairobi. Across East Africa, and even farther into West Africa, people were curious about what this visit really meant. In Kenya's capital, some citizens felt proud that such an important person had come to their country. They believed it was a good sign that Kenya was being respected by powerful nations like the United States. In their view, it meant opportunities, more training for the army, better equipment, new investments, and perhaps even jobs that would come from new projects. A few young people said they hoped the visit would bring more chances for Kenyan youth to work with American programs or learn new skills. But while some were excited, others felt uneasy. In markets, hair salons, and social media chats, people asked why a U.S. military leader would be so interested in Africa's security matters. Some said African problems should be solved by Africans. Others feared that too much foreign involvement in military affairs could lead to problems in the future. History had taught them that not every visit from a powerful country came without its own plans. Meanwhile, on social media, the conversation was even livelier. In Kenya, hashtags about Langley's visit began trending on Twitter and Facebook. Bloggers and content creators made videos and wrote articles discussing the possible reasons behind the visit. Some explained that AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, that Langley led, was responsible for U.S. military activities in Africa. They pointed out that while the organization claimed to be working for peace and security, there had often been debates about whether foreign troops should operate on African soil. Many young Africans, especially in countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, joined the conversation. In recent years, these nations had seen strong anti-foreign movements, especially after changes in government leadership. Young people in these countries were already discussing how Africa could manage its own affairs without depending on other nations. For them, Langley's visit was more than just a diplomatic trip. It felt like a reminder of the influence that powerful nations still had over African matters. People shared posts comparing past foreign visits to Langley's trip, noting how foreign powers often promised peace, security, and development, but sometimes left behind complicated situations. Many young voices expressed pride in their country's new efforts to stand up for themselves and choose their own future paths. They saw this visit as a test, a moment for African leaders to show whether they would protect their people's interests or allow foreign powers to make decisions for them. In several West African cities, students at universities gathered in informal groups to talk about the visit. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, one student named Idrissa spoke passionately about how Africa's future should be built by Africans. He told his friends that while international partnerships could be useful, they should never come at the cost of Africa's independence. His friends nodded, many agreeing that they wanted to see a stronger, more united Africa that could solve its own problems. Even in the bustling streets of Bamako, Mali, street vendors, taxi drivers, and workers shared similar opinions. The name Langley was mentioned in passing conversations. Some people believed the visit could bring good opportunities, while others warned about the dangers of becoming too close to foreign military forces. They remembered stories from other parts of Africa, where such relationships had caused tension and difficulties. Back in Nairobi, government officials continued with their meetings. Langley held private discussions with Kenya's top military officers and defense experts. Official statements released to the media spoke of strengthening security cooperation, fighting terrorism, and promoting regional stability. These words were shared in newspapers and television broadcasts, but many ordinary citizens wanted to know what those phrases truly meant. Would it lead to foreign soldiers staying in the country for too long? Would it affect the daily lives of people? Would it make Kenya safer, or would it bring unwanted attention from dangerous groups? Television talk shows invited experts and professors to explain the visit's importance. Some of them said it was a smart move by the Kenyan government to strengthen ties with a world power. They argued that cooperation with the United States could help improve Kenya's army, bring new technology, and support peace efforts in troubled areas like Somalia. Others, however, advised caution. They reminded viewers about past situations, where too much foreign involvement had led to unexpected problems for African nations. As the second day of Langley's visit continued, both excitement and concern filled the air. People watched closely for any new announcements. Some wondered if Langley would visit any local communities or speak directly to the people, but most of his schedule remained limited to official meetings and events. Later that evening, the conversation reached new heights online. In West Africa, hashtags calling for African unity and independence from foreign military influence became popular. Young people in different countries shared inspiring quotes about Africa's strength and potential. Videos of African leaders speaking about sovereignty were shared widely, along with clips from history lessons about Africa's journey through colonization and its struggle for freedom. In Ouagadougou, one young woman posted a video on TikTok saying, "We are not against friendship with other countries, but we must choose our friends wisely. Our safety and future should be in our own hands." Her video was viewed thousands of times, with people from Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal leaving supportive comments. By the time the evening news came on, it was clear that Langley's visit was no longer just a government affair. It had become a conversation that reached far beyond Nairobi's government buildings. It had entered homes, schools, and online communities across Africa. The African public had mixed feelings, some hopeful, others careful, but all deeply aware of the importance of these kinds of visits. This wasn't the first time a foreign, military leader had come to Africa, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But what mattered most was how African nations, especially their youth and leaders, responded. The visit had reminded people of the ongoing struggle to balance partnerships with independence, and the discussion was just beginning. As General Langley's visit to Kenya entered its third day, conversations about his presence continued to spread across Africa. In Nairobi, the streets were still busy, with matatus weaving through traffic, vendors calling out their prices, and people going about their daily routines. But even in the middle of all this normal activity, the visit remained a popular topic. At every bus stop, cafe, and street corner, someone was talking about the American general. While East Africans were curious about what the visit could bring for their security and international partnerships, in West Africa, the conversation took on a different tone. People there spoke less about military deals and more about the idea of independence and self-reliance. The visit reminded them of past events when foreign nations made promises to help, but left African countries facing difficult situations afterward. It brought back old memories for the older generation, and it raised important questions for the youth. In the city of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, young people gathered in small groups after their university classes to talk about what was happening. Among them was a young army officer named Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who had gained respect across the country for his leadership and bold ideas about Africa's future. Ibrahim was known for speaking openly about the importance of African unity and the need for countries to manage their own affairs without outside interference. When asked by a local journalist about Langley's visit to Kenya, Ibrahim chose his words carefully. He did not mention the American general by name, but his message was clear. Sitting on a simple wooden chair in a room with faded blue walls, he spoke into the microphone of the local TV station. His voice was calm, but firm. "Africa is a land of great strength," he said. "Our people are wise, our lands are rich, and our future belongs to us. While we welcome friendship and cooperation with others, we must be careful about the partnerships we accept. Security is our responsibility. No one will protect our homes better than ourselves." His words were broadcast that evening, and they quickly spread across social media. Short video clips of his statement were shared thousands of times on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. In Burkina Faso, young people applauded his courage. In Mali, people shared his speech with comments calling for African unity. Even in Kenya, where Langley was still holding meetings, Ibrahim's words found an audience among youth who admired leaders unafraid to speak the truth. In his speech, Traoré reminded the people of Africa's long journey, from the times of ancient kingdoms to the struggles against colonization, and now to the modern day when Africa still faced many challenges. He said that no matter how difficult things became, the solution would always be found within Africa itself, through cooperation among its people and leaders. What made Ibrahim's message even more powerful was that he avoided using angry or harsh language. He did not blame or insult other nations. Instead, he spoke about dignity, wisdom, and the value of standing tall in a world where many forces often tried to control weaker ones. His way of speaking touched people's hearts because it was simple, honest, and hopeful. Across West Africa, many young people agreed with him. They talked about how Africa had natural resources, hardworking people, and smart minds. What it needed now was the courage to manage its affairs without waiting for approval or help from faraway countries. They believed that if African nations worked together, they could build stronger armies, better schools, and fairer governments. Ibrahim's speech sparked new discussions in universities and community centers. In Bamako, a group of students met at a local library to talk about how their generation could bring positive change. They spoke about the importance of learning Africa's true history, understanding how past foreign relationships had shaped their countries, and how future partnerships should be built on respect and equality. In Dakar, a group of women leaders held a small meeting in a community hall. They talked about the speech and how it related to their work in empowering women and young girls. One of the women said, "If we can defend our homes and care for our families, we can also help protect our communities and make wise decisions about our future." Even in Kenya, some citizens began to view Langley's visit differently after hearing about Ibrahim's message. At first, many had seen the visit as a great opportunity, but now some started asking deeper questions. In cafes and online forums, people discussed whether their country should depend too much on foreign military help, or whether it should invest more in training its own soldiers and securing its own borders. The Kenyan government, aware of these conversations, continued to highlight the positive sides of the visit. Officials spoke of planned joint exercises, new equipment donations, and promises of support in the fight against terrorism. They reminded citizens that partnerships with other nations had helped Kenya in the past and would continue to do so. But even as these official statements were made, the words of Ibrahim Traoré remained in the air. They reached places where government speeches could not, into the hearts of everyday people, students, farmers, and small business owners who cared about their future and wanted a say in how their countries worked with foreign powers. That evening, a young Kenyan man named Daniel posted a message on social media. He wrote, "We don't hate others, and we don't refuse friendship, but we must be wise in choosing who stands with us. Africa is strong. We can protect our homes, care for our people, and build our future together." His message was shared by hundreds of people, showing how deeply the conversation was spreading. General Langley's visit, which had started as a simple official trip, had now sparked a wide and serious discussion about Africa's independence, dignity, and the kind of partnerships it wanted for its future. The visit was still ongoing, but one thing was clear. Africa's young people were paying attention. They were listening, thinking, and speaking out. No matter what decisions were made in meeting rooms, the voices of the people would continue to grow stronger. And leaders, like Ibrahim Traoré, reminded them that the future was in their hands. By the fourth day of General Langley's visit to Kenya, the excitement and discussions it had created were showing no signs of slowing down. In Nairobi, the city remained lively with people going about their everyday business. But wherever you turned, there was always someone talking about the visit. Newspapers still carried headlines. TV shows continued inviting experts to give their opinions. And social media was filled with comments, pictures, and short videos connected to the event. On this particular morning, Langley was scheduled to visit a Kenyan military base just outside Nairobi. Here he would meet with top Kenyan army officials, observe training exercises, and attend a private briefing. The visit was meant to show the partnership between the United States and Kenya in matters of regional security and peacekeeping. Cameras from various news stations gathered at the entrance of the base, eager to capture images of Langley shaking hands with senior officers and smiling for the press. At the same time, in many neighborhoods, small groups of young people gathered around television sets in shops and cafes to watch the coverage. Some watched out of curiosity, others with cautious interest, and a few with silent concern. People wondered what promises or agreements were being made behind closed doors. What would this mean for Kenya's future? Would this bring peace, or would it involve Kenya in matters they might later regret? In a small town in western Kenya, a local teacher named Mary organized a discussion with her students after their history class. She encouraged them to think about the visit and its meaning for Africa as a whole. When big leaders visit our countries, it's important to ask ourselves why they are here, she told them. What do they want and what do we want for our people? One student raised his hand and asked, "Is it bad to have foreign visitors like General Langley?" Mary smiled and replied, "It's not about being bad or good. It's about being wise. Friendship is important, but every country must protect its own interests. When two friends talk, both should gain something fair from the conversation." Across the continent in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's earlier message was still being shared widely. People praised his calm but clear words about Africa's strength and the importance of standing together. His message was being turned into quotes for posters, t-shirts, and even small billboards in some towns. Young people admired how he spoke, of unity, and the belief that Africa could solve its own problems if its people worked together. Traoré himself continued his usual duties but kept a close eye on the growing conversations his words had started. He was pleased to see how Africans from different countries, languages, and cultures were discussing important matters about their future. He believed that true strength came from understanding, wisdom, and peaceful courage. For him, leadership was not about shouting the loudest but about speaking sense when others were silent. Meanwhile, in West Africa, several community radio stations began organizing call-in programs, asking listeners for their opinions on Langley's visit to Kenya. Listeners from villages and cities called in with thoughtful messages. Some said they welcomed partnerships with other nations if they brought jobs, schools, and health care. Others warned that too many foreign soldiers or agreements could take away Africa's decision-making power. In Mali, a market trader named Awa said during one program, "It is fine to have visitors, but we must remember that our homes are ours. A visitor must respect the rules of the house." Many people agreed with her simple yet wise words. It was a message repeated in different ways by others across the region. Friendship is welcome, but it must come with respect and fairness. Back in Kenya, a famous musician named Joseph Mwangi popularly known as Mwangi Beats, released a new song that very evening. The song was called Africa We Decide, and talked about the beauty of the continent, its strong people, and the importance of choosing wisely when making deals with others. The song's catchy beat and thoughtful lyrics made it an instant hit, especially among young people. Mwangi's music video showed scenes of African farmers, builders, students, and soldiers working together. It reminded viewers that no matter where they came from, Africans shared a common dream, a peaceful, prosperous, and independent continent. The video also showed images of old African leaders who had fought for their country's freedom many years ago. It gently encouraged today's generation to remember the value of dignity and unity. As the day ended, General Langley held a short press conference before heading to his next stop. He spoke politely about the warmth of the Kenyan people and praised the country's efforts in promoting peace in the region. He mentioned future plans for military training programs and humanitarian projects. His words were kind and professional, but for many the deeper conversation was no longer about official speeches. It was about the growing awareness of Africa's future in the hearts of its people. That night, a young girl named Fatima in Dakar sat with her grandmother, listening to a radio program about the visit. After the program, she asked her grandmother, "Will Africa always need help from others to stay safe?" Her grandmother gently smiled and replied, "No, my child. Africa is like a big tree. It sometimes leans on the wind, but its roots are strong. One day, the branches will spread wide, and it will stand tall on its own." This simple conversation reflected what millions of Africans were feeling in different ways. They didn't reject friendship or support, but they wanted fair partnerships where African voices were respected and their dignity protected. As people went to sleep that evening, the discussions continued quietly in homes, tea stalls, and on phone calls. The visit of one foreign general had done something unexpected. It had sparked a meaningful, peaceful conversation about Africa's future, dignity, and the kind of relationships its people wanted with the rest of the world. The story was not yet over. More days remained, and new voices were ready to speak up. Africa was awake, and its people, especially the youth, were showing that they cared deeply about their homeland's direction. The next chapter would be shaped by their thoughts, hopes, and decisions. As the final day of General Langley's visit to Kenya arrived, the excitement across the country was still noticeable. Newspapers printed fresh headlines about his meetings with top officials, while television stations reported on the outcomes of his visits to military bases, schools, and health projects. Officially, the visit was being described as a success by both American and Kenyan authorities. Smiles, handshakes, and group photographs filled the pages of local newspapers. But while the official program carried on smoothly, something else had been quietly growing throughout the week: the voice of the people. From Kenya to Burkina Faso, from Mali to Senegal, ordinary Africans had started a thoughtful, peaceful conversation about their future. The visit of one foreign military leader had unexpectedly made people pause and reflect on their countries, their independence, and the kind of relationships they wanted to build with the world. In Nairobi's bustling streets, people gathered, in markets, bus stations, and small shops to discuss what the visit meant. Some were hopeful, saying that new partnerships could bring technology, training, and better resources for their soldiers. Others remained cautious, wondering whether too many agreements might lead their country into unwanted situations. Most agreed, however, that it was important for Africa's leaders to listen to the people's opinions before making big decisions. Among those who felt strongly about this was a young university student named Samuel. He had followed the visit closely, reading news articles and watching TV discussions every evening. Samuel believed in peace and partnership, but felt that African nations needed to speak with one voice. He organized a student discussion group at his university, where young people gathered to share their thoughts about the visit and their hopes for Africa. During one meeting, Samuel stood up and said, "It's not about saying no to friendship. It's about saying yes to fairness. Africa has welcomed visitors for many years. Now we must make sure that when we sit at the table, our voice is strong and clear." His words were met with nods of agreement from the group. For them, this was more than a week of news. It was a lesson about dignity, wisdom, and the responsibility of the new generation. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré watched the events unfold from a distance. He had not made any new public statements but saw how his earlier message continued to inspire many. His quiet leadership style made people admire him even more. Local radio stations played recordings of his previous speech, and young people shared his quotes on social media, writing messages of unity, strength, and hope. At the same time, cultural leaders, poets, and musicians across West Africa used their talents to add to the conversation. A poet in Mali named Fatoumata wrote a piece titled "The Tree of Africa," describing the continent as a tall, ancient tree with deep roots, standing strong through storms. Her poem was read on radio stations, bringing tears to listeners' eyes. It reminded them of their shared history, struggles, and the unbreakable bond between African nations. In Kenya, a respected elder named Mzee Juma was invited to speak on a popular evening radio program. Known for his wisdom and gentle words, he spoke about how Africa's strength came not from weapons or armies but from the hearts of its people. He said, "A country is like a family. When visitors come, we offer them tea and kind words, but we also remind them that the home belongs to us. We must never forget that." His message was simple, but it touched many listeners. Callers phoned in to thank him, saying they had been waiting to hear such calm and thoughtful words in the middle of all the excitement. Even in rural villages, where few had access to televisions, people gathered around radios and mobile phones to listen to these discussions. In one village in northern Kenya, a group of farmers sat under a tree after work, listening to a battery-powered radio. When the program ended, they talked about the importance of self-respect and wisdom when dealing with others. One elderly farmer named Yusuf said, "We must be like our land. It listens to the wind, feels the rain, and stands strong in the sun. It does not move when told, and it keeps its roots deep." Everyone around him nodded in agreement. These simple conversations, repeated in different languages and accents across the continent, showed how deeply the visit had touched ordinary people's thoughts. On the final evening of Langley's stay, a farewell dinner was held at a well-known hotel in Nairobi. Kenyan officials thanked him for his visit, and he expressed his appreciation for the hospitality he had received. There were speeches about future partnerships and the promise of continued cooperation. Cameras flashed as guests smiled for photographs, and the room filled with polite applause. Outside the hotel, however, a group of young musicians played Mwangi Beat's new song "Africa We Decide" on a small speaker. Passers-by paused to listen, some clapping to the rhythm, others humming along. The message of the song was clear: Africa's future should be shaped by Africans themselves, with wise choices, dignity, and unity. As General Langley's plane prepared to leave the next morning, the streets of Nairobi returned to their usual busy rhythm. Matatus filled with workers heading to their jobs, school children hurried along sidewalks, and market vendors called out their prices. Life carried on, but something had quietly changed. The visit had sparked a peaceful but powerful conversation across Africa. It reminded people of the importance of asking questions, of thinking carefully about the future, and of believing in their own strength. No single visit or leader could decide Africa's destiny. That responsibility rested with its people, in classrooms, markets, villages, and cities. In his final report to his team, Langley wrote that the visit had been successful and productive. What his report didn't mention was the deeper, quieter success it had achieved, encouraging millions of ordinary Africans to reflect on their dignity, unity, and the road ahead. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré met with a group of young officers and spoke about the future. He told them, "The world watches Africa, but Africa must also watch itself. We are not weak. We are not lost. Our future is here, in our hands." The young officers listened carefully, their eyes filled with hope and determination. Across the continent, others felt the same way. Though the visit was over, the conversations it started would continue for many years to come. And as the African sun rose on a new day, its people held on to one truth: Their land, their people, and their future belonged to them.